Well, so it's your position then that wrestling is not fixed?
No, they're great athletes. It's a great sport.
A headbutt by the hitman and back up down to the king. Pinfalls don't count.
I think it's fake. You think it's fake?
Wrestling is fake. Now there is a contentious phrase, because for most of its existence the noble sport of professional wrestling has been locked away behind the wall of kayfabe, this kind of illusion of realness that has been upheld by everyone in the business. So much so that walking right up to a wrestler and asking them if what they do for a living is fake is gonna get you one of these.
You think it's fake?
Now, after Vince McMahon blew the lid off the whole thing in 1989 to get out from under the various state athletic commissions, which is definitely a tale for another video, we now live in a post-kayfabe era where the audience has been enlightened to the fact that the people on screen are performers and these are characters taking part in this sort of weird athletic morality play that is sports entertainment. But even now, calling the whole thing fake is still going to get you in trouble with Randy Orton on Twitter. But back up for a second, because in case you've been living under a Dwayne Johnson, wrestling is predetermined. The winner is decided by the booker and the competitors work together to tell a story about good guys and bad guys, and they deliver moves that look painful and awe-inspiring and are actually as safe as possible, or they just cover each other in dog food. Not all art is high art. Prior to the revelations about kayfabe, the media was obsessed with this notion that wrestling was a fixed sport, with endless articles and exposés trying to uncover the truth about it, which the wrestlers and promoters rightly viewed as someone trying to put them out of business. And they went to absurd lengths to protect it. Dr. David D. Schultz essentially ended his own career with that slap that we saw earlier to 2020 reporter John Stossel. Lou Albano took a televised lie detector test and failed, and in years prior, performers would invite punters into the ring to get a right good stretching and double check just how fake the whole thing is. But as something that evolved out of legitimate amateur wrestling, let's look at how professional wrestling actually became one big work. I'm Laurie, hailing from Parts Unknown, and this is How Wrestling is Fake Explained. Now, before we get on with the video, please do consider giving this channel a subscribe. We know a lot of you guys regularly watch all of our content, but a lot of you aren't actually subscribed. And for this very brief moment of your time, it helps us out immensely. Which also means that we can make more videos like this, Luke's Actually Good series, Adam's booking videos, and the lists. Now, the origins of kayfabe and pro wrestling share a knotted history as the sport evolved out of freestyle wrestling in Europe during the 1800s and other native forms of competition in North America and Japan. Kayfabe, the appearance of realness, became more integral to the performance because of how the business was run. Professor Dan Glenday from the Department of Sociology at Brock University calls wrestling a culturally embedded spectacle and said, commonly known as catch as catch can, the early wrestling contests in the 19th and early 20th century normally included side bets or gambling. Most historians of professional wrestling look to Great Britain as the cradle of catch wrestling, while Germany and France receive honourable mention. Wrestling was a carnival act starting sometime in the 1860s and 70s. Amateur wrestlers would basically compete to entertain the crowd, whilst carnival workers would act as their promoters and bookers to give it some of that carnival razzmatazz. A lot of guys wore colourful costumes and created fictional backstories to their characters, adding some much needed drama to proceedings. Mostly though, these were legitimate athletic contests though. We are going on the word of the performers and the carnival workers of the time, and that's what they would say. But these competitions did used to last hours, so you would think that if you were working it, you would make it snappy, give them a tight 8 minutes with 3 restarts just like Raw. Now, Professor Glenday explains that the purity of the competition got corrupted when money became involved. The link between the evolution of freestyle wrestling with gambling, side bets, carnivals, and entertainment in Europe and North America probably explains the branching to professional wrestling from its freestyle roots. Money became the name of the contest, deception became the means to make more money. Just like how pay-to-play carnival games are rigged in favour of the house, so too were the wrestling contests. To a degree. Wrestlers like George Hackenschmidt distinguished himself from other wrestling competitors with his version of the bear hug. However, by 1904 in Great Britain, Hackenschmidt had learned showmanship from Tom Cannon and Charles Cochran in order to make money wrestling as a variety act during the popular bodybuilding strongman contests. These talents he brought with him to the USA the following year when he lost his first match against Frank Gotch. Prior to Hackenschmidt and Gotch, the sport of wrestling evolved because of the competing interests of three factions: the impresarios, the carnies, and the barnstormers, all united in the search of one thing: honesty, money. It's money. It was money. Impresarios are managers who would help craft the personas for the wrestlers to make them more appealing and book matches to make them more interesting. The carnies developed these dangerous wrestling moves known as hooks that were illegal on the amateur wrestling scene but not in carnival competition, which gave themselves a high win rate. But also they worked in tandem with the barnstormers, who were guys who competed like travelling wrestlers but often would work with the carnies in order to stage matches and hoover up all the profits made through betting. And it was this focus on squeezing as much cash as possible out of each performance that fundamentally changed the way people approached wrestling. The DNA is there. You've got booked matches, outlandish personalities, moves that you wouldn't see on the amateur circuit. This era is also where the term mark originates. You take your carnival and your rigged games, your ring toss, your balloon dart, your duck pond, which all sound like drop retribution names, but the goal of all of them was to attract people susceptible to spending their money on a pay-to-play basis. It's a similar model to how free-to-play mobile games and the like work. Some people are just whales and they're much more likely to spend money than others, whether that's through frustration, bravado, or gullibility. And when the game operators found someone who was easily enticed into playing the game back to back and had a fair amount of dough, they would literally mark them with chalk. Here's Al Snow explaining to some trainees.
How do we make sure we get the right person? We mark them. Ticket booth set up in such a way to where the person has to lift up their wallet or lift up the purse, and the person in the ticket booth can see how much money you have. I come up with some dust or a piece of chalk and I mark it, hence the term mark.
So then all the folks manning the games have to do is look for the marked mark and entice them over to throw their money at a rigged game. Now, wrestling in this early evolutionary period before the last vestiges of true sport were drummed out of it, marks are there to lose their money on the bets for a rigged competition. Now let's hop back to Hackenschmidt and Gotch, as the pair had two of the most significant matches in early wrestling history in 1908 and 1911 over the World Championship, which Gotch came out on top of. Now, we talked about Hackenschmidt's showmanship earlier, what a bloody tongue twister that is, and that was essentially to play with his opponents to give this illusion that they might actually be able to beat this dominant wrestler, because then the stakes are higher and then people will come back to see the matches. Though those tables were turned when he met Frank Gotch, because at his peak, good old Gotch was described as utterly peerless and was a talented technical wrestler. But even this championship match, this defining moment in Gotch's career, is overcast with the shadows of trickery. Because during the 1908 match with Hackenschmidt for the World Championship, George complained to the referee about Gotch's foul tactics, including thumbing and headbutting, which left Hackenschmidt bleeding, and Gotch was also reportedly covered in oil, which Hackenschmidt asked for him to have a shower before they continued the match. Interestingly, the referee ruled that he should have pointed that out before the match starts. Hey, this guy's cheating. Well, you should have said that before the match started. What is your job again? Now, the whole thing got so bad that after a 2-hour battle to the first fall, Hackenschmidt just refused to return to the ring for a second fall and relinquished his world title to Gotch. They then met again in 1911, but even greater controversy hung over this meeting as Hackenschmidt had injured his knee training against partner Dr. Ben Roller, though years later, Ad Santel would tell Lou Thez that he was paid $5,000 by Gotch's backers to injure Hackenschmidt. Now weirdly, Hackenschmidt himself denied any involvement from Santel and maintained that it was Roller who caused the injury. Either way, Gotch discovered the injury mid-match and just took advantage of the entire thing to walk out with the World Championship. With the World Championship around his waist, Gotch became a national sensation in the US and reigned until his retirement in 1913. But the sport was gaining a different sort of notoriety as the critical eye of the media sought to expose wrestling's secrets. One of those brazen fakes which has soured the people of this city on travelling professional wrestlers was said that the match was not on the square, that it was a fake, pure and simple. It is safe to say that 99% of all wrestling matches where an admission fee is charged and where professionals take part have been pre-arranged. So as the media began to draw back the curtain on kayfabe and expose the business, interest in wrestling began to wane throughout the 1910s, and the death knell was almost heard after old oily himself Frank Gotch retired in 1913. By 1920 in the US, things were looking bleaker than staring down the barrel of a 3-hour Raw. But in the Great White North, an evolution was underway, as Dan Glenday explained. The northeastern US, Ontario and Quebec became a centre for professional wrestling when promoters Toots Mondt, Edge Strangler Lewis and his manager Billy Sandow, also known as the Gold Dust Trio, developed most of the features associated with professional wrestling today, including a time limit to matches, more acrobatic moves such as the dropkick, and unlikely submission holds. Suddenly, here was this move away from the plodding pacing of the matches of yore, which would drag on for hours. Mondt called this blend of Greco-Roman wrestling, freestyle, lumber camp fighting, and theatre slam bang Western style wrestling, which, you are correct, sounds like a grill house. With Slam Bang, the trio took wrestling out of the carnivals and into burlesque theatres and eventually sporting arenas, creating the first real promotion in the process. It no doubt helped that Edge Strangler Lewis was legitimately an elite shoot wrestler and the world's champion, so he alone could draw a large crowd. But with the greater take they made on the gate at the sports venues, they made the smart move of signing performers to exclusive contracts and essentially becoming the only game in town. Basically, and with this ultimate control over how wrestling was presented, they were able to mould it like clay into a new form. They gave matches a shorter, snappier structure, invented the concept of finishing moves and tag team wrestling. They also began to pair teams and rivals up for extended periods, basically creating storylines that evolved throughout the matches and essentially advanced the chemistry between the combatants. We are now style of wrestling travelled on the breeze or through some sort of shared connection to the Queen to the UK, where a one-upping of that format was created called All-In Wrestling, which added foreign weapons like steel chairs and apparently women wrestling in mud. Mud. That sounds bad, doesn't it? But that is just what we called the North back then. I can say that because I live here. No one's going to be pissed off at all. Hang on, someone's at the door. Hello? Ow. So anyway, wrestling was on the rise again and now had the added hook of these flashy moves. Flashy moves. A drop kick. Who am I? Jim Cornette. That's too flashy for me. Anyway, storylines which kept the fans returning. But it was a fragile business still, and one that still lived in fear of being exposed for the pseudo-competition that it was. Which actually happened in New York in 1933 after this coalition of promoters decided to share their profits, but in the process burned one Jack Pfeiffer. Now Pfeiffer was a promoter himself, but he was now on the outside of the business looking in, so he took his revenge by organising an interview with Dan Parker, who was the sports editor of the New York Daily Mirror, and telling all. And this is the thing, fans had long suspected that wrestling wasn't a true competition, and they'd likely made up their minds that they, I don't know, kind of liked it anyway. But this revelation fundamentally changed wrestling's relationship with the press. It engendered a feeling of bitterness amongst sports writers who felt as if they were being taken for fools and used as mere promotional tools when reporting the results of fixed matches. Many just stopped reporting the results because it wasn't legitimate competition. And without that promotion in the press, the business in New York essentially struggled for 15 years. And it feels like legitimacy has been the bone of contention with wrestling for the longest time. From 1895 that we heard earlier, when the sport was still mostly shoot, all the way up to the most famous expose, which was John Stossel's 2020 report on the business in 1984. The overarching media narrative has been about whether or not wrestling is fake. And you can see how that would lead an already clandestine industry to retreat even further behind the barricade of kayfabe. The few times the curtain had been peeled back, the house had all but burned down. This confirmation bias at its very best. But from the media's perspective, I reckon it must be the brazenness of the lie, the doubling down on the idea that it's all real, the slapster reporters, the choking out talk show hosts that just perpetuated this, I guess, kind of weird feud in slow motion between the two parties. And it didn't even really end after the veil was lifted, as Paul MacArthur wrote for Wrestling Perspective in 1998. They are so blinded by the real versus fake issue that they keep their heads in the sand when it comes to understanding pro wrestling. The record ratings, the revenue, the drugs, the sex scandals, the premature deaths, and all the other important issues that surround this business are overlooked. They're probably fake too. It's almost as if kayfabe was so all-encompassing that the lines between fiction and reality were so blurred that perhaps for the media it was just better to just ignore the big stories rather than be bitten on the arse if it turned out it was all just another work. And unfortunately, kayfabe certainly covered for its share of dodgy business practices and shady dealings across the years. But in 1989, the kayfabe wall was torn down. That's actually the Berlin Wall, which also went in '89. When Vince McMahon asked the New Jersey State Senate to consider wrestling an activity providing entertainment to spectators rather than conducting bona fide athletic contest. And this was all to get out of paying the Athletic Commission fees and adhering to their legislation, which is kind of complex to get into right now, and as I said before, likely the subject for a follow-up video. Let me know if you want that in the comments. But it's worth noting here that 30 years later, wrestling is still on the telly. Their biggest secret didn't exactly cause the business to explode. And I think Terry Funk put it well when he was on the Steve Austin show and said,
"What is professional wrestling? It was a pure shoot in 1905.
Right.
And it was total entertainment. Vince announced a total entertainment in 2010.
Right.
Well, if you stretch a line along that, we all evolved somewhere along the line. And what we evolved to is what the people wanted us to be. What turned the turnstile. That's what this business is. What the people want it to be, and that's what it always is.
And that is the thing about kayfabe. It kind of became the cover under which all of this evolution could happen, narrowly avoiding the tricky question of why in the hell are you pretending to fight? Because once you actually see it for what it is, pro wrestling just makes a sort of sense, doesn't it? And your disbelief can be easily suspended as you're dragged into this wonderful, silly, pantomime football match atmosphere and swept along by a story. In his book Hooker, An Authentic Wrestler's Adventures Inside the World of Pro Wrestling, the legendary Lou Thesz wrote, "The reality or substance of professional wrestling is the ability to perpetuate a fantasy. It didn't matter to me that professional wrestling was a performance." I really hope that was published by Lou Thesz Press. And I think that's it, because once the gambling rackets died out, did it ever matter that it was a performance? Because the biz was dying out when it was just two guys stretching each other out for 3 hours at a time, and that little bit of showmanship, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of work is what has kept the business going strong all of these years. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at professional wrestling's evolution from fight to fraud. Please do like, subscribe, comment and share this video around if you really liked it, as that would help us out. And if you're in the mood for more explainers, why not watch this one about how championship belts are made and why they even exist in the first place. Thanks also to our lovely patrons who are scrolling on the bottom of the screen. Details for that in the description down below. See you next time. Jam that jam.